Alright everyone, I said several years ago that the Nicaragua Canal was basically fucked up and doomed, that it probably wouldn't be built, and if it did, wouldn't be able to compete with the Panama Canal, and at the time, all of the people who had called me out, when I called China a paper tiger, or paper dragon, and said their economy has structural problems because it's reliant completely on exports, and at any given time the entire Western world could decide, oh, well, India is about as cheap and we'd rather work with them, or we'd work with Thailand or Vietnam or something and, pay 2 cents more per item and nobody cares as our economies get back on track and we wish to drain China of some of its political influence. All the people who jumped down my throat for that then proceeded to jump down my throat on the Nicaragua Canal. I had several people, ICQ was still alive at the time, and I had several Russian apologists and Chinese apologists there talking about how great leftist programs were, how great central planning was. Oh, the Nicaragua Canal, soon the U.S. will lose its dominance over Atlantic to Pacific and vice versa trade. The Panama Canal will be useless. And I pointed out at the time, the Panama Canal is currently undergoing a reconstruction to massively increase its size. It's no longer going to be one relatively narrow canal system. It's going to be 2 much wider canal systems, greatly increasing the efficiency and speed of trade and the volume capable of flowing through that region. And the Nicaragua Canal, meanwhile, hadn't a single shovelful of dirt hadn't been removed. Now, indeed, even the government of China appears to agree with the assessment that it's a bad idea. Now, this is to their credit, that they finally, after several years, realized, what's the point of doing this? Instead, they've got a 50-year easement on a giant chunk of central Nicaragua that now they can use for any other form of development they happen to want, which is probably the goal in the first place. They get their little military base and they get some tourist resorts for the Chinese investor class, basically. That's all they wanted. Nicaragua doesn't even get its canal. You had continuous protests for over a year involving farmers in the location that didn't want to be forced off their land and flooded out as the canal was built. Because that's what would have had to have been done. A massive investment with no guaranteed payoff whatsoever. The nation of China would have been crazy to actually develop this. And these same people that claimed it would be built and China would become the master of trade even in the Americas, you are wrong. It won't even be built. No construction has actually been undergone. They'll put up their base, they'll have their little naval port or whatever, and that's what they'll have in Latin America. The Panama Canal will continue to be king. And by the way, part of this is diplomatic. The Chinese managed to get the Panamanian government to essentially not recognize Taiwan's claim of control over all of China, which is basically what the Chinese wanted, I think, in the first place. Panama's willing to say, okay, well, have it your way diplomatically. Who cares? We're Panama. Nobody cares what we think. And so they keep their canal hegemony, get a little bit of Chinese windfall in the form of investment into some things there, and that's all they wanted. They get the investment, Nicaragua gets shafted. So sorry to the people of Nicaragua, but that wealth that was promised to you by your El Presidente is never actually going to materialize. You're going to get screwed by the Chinese now. Which is exactly what I said would happen. You will have no Nicaraguan canal. The canal that they called for, which would have been 3 times longer and required a huge amount of investment and manpower anyway, would have been lackluster compared to the Panama Canal, even as it stands now. And now the Panama Canal is going to be more than double its capabilities. And it's almost done now. I think it's slated for completion in 2018. How are you going to build a 3 times the size canal in under a year when you haven't even begun construction, you haven't even fully planned it out yet? It's just not going to happen. It was a doomed project. So China's investment, they have this problem in China too. There's a difference. They've studied this throughout time. There's a big difference on the likelihood and rate of return in the privately invested projects that happen in China and those that are centrally planned or co-opted by the Chinese government, sort of given grants, guarantees by the government there with public money. In the latter case, the failure rate is more than 50%. That is, the Chinese government builds some city. Some bureau says, it would be a good idea to have a city here. for all the people that are working in this giant factory, or this other city here is heavily polluted. The middle class wants to move outside of that area. Let's build a couple of towns outside of that area. And they end up ghost towns. They have trains that don't go anywhere. They have roads that nobody uses. They have fields that remain unplowed because of this central planning aspect. Private endeavors, meanwhile, in China usually build some sort of return. It may not be enormous, but it's there. It actually, at the very least, it breaks even, unlike the centrally planned aspects of their economy. And this differentiation has existed for some time and gotten more prevalent over time as the private class in China that invests gets better at its job, and the Chinese bureaus continue to slide backwards due to the natural effects of bureaucracy, which is cronyism and graft and everything else under the sun. Because these bureaus, they say, well, we need to announce a massive project to justify our own salaries. Let's just make something random. Doesn't matter if it works, the government will pay for it anyway, and it'll continue to pay us. We have a similar problem with our bureaus here. They have to make problems to solve in order to justify their ever-inclining expense accounts. The EPA does this. The Department of Education does this. The Pentagon certainly does this. It's a problem with our economy. It's much worse in China. That's why they have problems. So there won't be a Nicaraguan canal. All these people that said it would be built and it would be glorious and it would decline the U.S. Control over trade through that region, you were wrong. Now it's time to own up to that fact and admit that Styx Hexenhammer was right once again on the Chinese question. It's just like the Spratly Islands. They're fortifying them. They have no legit claim over them. They're going to continue getting perturbed by the U.S. Navy. They're going to continue driving all their neighbors to rearm. The Japanese have already done so. The South Koreans are sort of talking about maybe the possibility of having maybe we need a few nuclear weapons over here or something. China's destabilizing East Asia. I don't even think the Chinese realize what's going on. So therein lies the problem. They centrally invest these projects, and they usually, more than half the time, they fail. Which means there was more than a 50-50 chance from the very beginning, when it was just a suggestion that was made, that the Nicaraguan Canal wouldn't be built. They'd be better off trying to expand maybe the Sinai, the canal there. Maybe they should go to the Sinai Peninsula and try to work with the Egyptians. That, by the way, would probably be good for world trade. Certainly help them with trading stuff to Europe. Maybe they should sail parts of the Chinese Navy down into that region to prevent all these various rebel groups and rogue states from attacking the shipping lines. Maybe they should start attacking pirates. Right now, it's basically the U.S. has to stave off piracy in half the world on its own. Why aren't the Chinese helping us? Some of their shipping containers are going to get stolen by some Somalians at some point. So I'd think they'd have a vested... They don't even care. Like, oh, Chinese citizens got held hostage. We're not going to pay anything. Sure, the family can, but they're too poor to do so. Now it's become more and more of a problem there, too. So, yeah. Nicaragua gets screwed by the Chinese. The people there, I think, realize that they got screwed. The government there doesn't want to talk about it too much. And by the way, I'll link in the description to the Miami Herald article that's archived. But there are other articles basically saying the same thing. Oh yeah, the Chinese government would rather, invest in Panama at this point because their canal is actually going to be expanded, will actually be on time and on budget, and actually, it's one of the few, U.S. investments that's working. We invest in stuff in this country, it usually doesn't pan out because our government makes dumb decisions. With the Panama Canal, I guess it was important enough to expand it for our own benefit that they actually decided to do a good job. They actually decided, yeah, on this time, we probably shouldn't end up big dig mode and be, 10 years behind schedule with 4 or 5 times the original starting budget. I think that might start to look bad on the world stage. So this time, let's do it right for once, say the bureaus, as they oversee the investment into the mass expansion of shipping capabilities there. That's about all. Peace out.